there were several things about this paper that I thought really helped frame a national agenda. So the first thing was how they have proposed alternative models of creating density. Because what's the key issue that everybody raised in their comments? It's the lack of economies of scale. So if we think of the FAHI network and what's possible when you bring together 55 members across 6 states, and what kind of resources and scale you can create, when we think of OWISTA, working with over 70 native CDFIs, creating a national organization, advancing their interests, and really influencing the CDFI fund to do a study that I'll never forget, showed that there are fewer mortgages written in Native American communities than in my neighborhood in Silver Spring. So, it's how do we create these really alternative models of density? The second thing, this comes out of hope. How do we seize private infrastructure to rebuild markets? So what Bill did is he took the buildings that Regions Bank was going to abandon and create even a bigger banking desert that already exists. If you are with Bill for 10 minutes and he doesn't say the word banking desert at least 5 times, you know that he's tired, right? So, but how do you take that infrastructure and not just leverage it, but then how do you make it better? And what was fascinating about that story is how he understood his community well enough, so he began offering the products and services that actually made financial inclusion real. And it's been our privilege to work with him with Children's Savings, which have, in an interesting way, as we all know, because parents will do for their children what they won't do for themselves, get the parents banked as the kids have gotten banked. And then I thought the stories of human capital development, we've talked about it here, but I think the real focus on how do we build the human capital, and at CFED we use the word hope in concrete form. Because we've seen how owning assets really changes people's aspirations in a really concrete way, somewhat unrelated to the actual amount of financial resources that they have. And I think the innovative ways that they're building human capital alongside, as I said before, the physical capital and the opportunities are a real sign for what happens in the future. So those were just 3 things that I saw.
Other responses?
I'll go. I'd sort of build on what Andrea just said. I, as I was reading through the paper and listening to the panel and just sort of thinking about this work, I actually reflect back on an event that was urban in nature, and it was an event in Washington, D.C., where the mayor of Detroit and the chairman and CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase were talking about bringing back poor places in urban areas. And one of the people in the audience asked the question of Mr. Diamond, the chairman and CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, what one thing would you recommend to the next administration about how to bring back poor places? And I think his answer is applicable to every community and to this conversation we had today about rural communities. It's not one thing. Mm-hmm. That where we have all kind of evolved, and everybody has said it one way or another today, is that these are complex problems that require comprehensive solutions. And none of us comes with all of the tools and resources to move the dial at the same time. And so it's about putting together bricks and mortar strategies and asset building strategies and human spirit strategies and social capital strategies and a policy environment that creates the complementary and coordinated investments in these communities and the people that we care so much about to uplift and create opportunity.
The example of the community facilities relending that was in the paper and also was mentioned in the panel, I also was struck by, because I think there's real parallels there with the conversation about collaboration that was a theme of the morning panel. Because I think what you saw there were a couple of things. One, it was a collaboration of the CDFIs and the community organizations coming together to figure out how do we take an inefficient resource that's there but is not being unleashed and use policy change to make that happen, which I think is very powerful. I think those groups working with philanthropy to come to the table to understand that collaboration requires resources also. And I was, just to digress for a moment, I remembered that also yesterday on our tour in the Delta when we stopped and we're talking to the mayor, had brought together herself and someone from Mississippi Valley University across the way, and they were talking, and it was again an example of a powerful partnership and how those communities were working together. And she noted that that was because there was a new president. And what I didn't get to ask, but I thought was overt at the table, was a person whose job now is to think about connecting the community to that university, right? And similarly, in order to get these resources and do collaboration, we have to pay someone to work on that collaboration. And I think we sometimes forget that as a resource. But in general, I thought the paper noting that there are resources that are out there that we can unleash if we pursue both policy change and through collaboration.
There were obviously many good things in the papers and many lessons to be extracted from them. I'd like to point out a couple that have already been mentioned, but I think are important. One is a long-term commitment. None of the panelists who spoke before started this yesterday or last week or last month. In fact, they have gotten to a point where we can point to the work that they've done and feel that that is in fact a story that needs to be emulated. But they have shown the long-term commitment that's necessary to get these things done. The persistence and the hard work and the years that get them to the point that they are. The other thing that's important is the collaboration. They have not done any of this alone. They've gone out, reached out to too many areas. There isn't a community that has a housing need alone. There isn't a community that has an education need alone. Communities have all sorts of needs that come together. And there was a woman that I admire that you know, Cushing Gilbert, who used to say, just like wars are too important to be left to the generals, housing is too important to be left to the housers. And it's important to understand that in doing the work we do in community development, it's important to bring in as many partners as possible. And one of many reasons that these groups are successful and can tell us these really great stories about what they've been able to accomplish and what they're working on is because they've brought on so many partners. They've been able to reach to the other organizations, reach to the private sector, reach to philanthropy, reach to local governments, and so on. And the long-term commitment and the collaboration, the reaching out, the bringing in as many resources as possible, I think are two very important ingredients in showing their stories as success stories.
The point that we all need to make clearly here is we're not starting at zero in any of these communities.
Mm-hmm.
There are assets there here. The conversation today was about there are lots of examples of what works in this audience. There are 150 different nonprofit organizations represented who are doing terrific work and doing things that are making a difference in their community. And our challenge is how do we elevate the things that are working, give them more visibility, invest in them so we can scale and replicate those models all over the country. And with scale and replicability, it gets back to your other question. This is how we bring economic opportunity to rural areas and get the rest of the country to appreciate the economic power and the human spirit that exists in these places that we want to invest in, we all want to benefit